Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, August 9th, 2007. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week we talked to brewer John Legnard of the Sandlot Brewery at Coors Field in Denver, Colorado. We'll talk to John about what it's like to work at a small brewery owned by one of the big beer companies, and we'll get some tips from John on making our own beers better. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. Just a quick note before we get into the mailbag this week. The guys at Craft Beer Radio are selling their second anniversary DVD, which has both released and unreleased audio content. If you're a fan of CBR, it would be a good investment, in my opinion, to show your support to Jeff and Greg by picking up a DVD. And if you need additional incentive, those who buy the DVD are going to be entered into a drawing, as Mike Myers' character said, a drawing for lots of cool brewery stuff. That is stuff that's donated by breweries. So there's an extra incentive there. Looking into the mailbag, our buddy Andy Sparks from thehomebrewery.com wrote in with a suggestion for keeping moisture down in chest freezers and kegerators. Continuing in our series of suggestions, Andy says it's called EVA Dry, EVA-DRY, and they are wireless dehumidifiers. These units have pellets in them that absorb water and a color indicator on them that turns from blue to pink when they absorb water. When the indicator turns pink, you remove the unit from your kegerator and plug it into the wall. This dries out the pellets, and they turn from pink to blue. He says these units are about $20 and can be used over and over. So EVA Dry. One of our chemistry professor friends, Paul Charlesworth, writes in with another suggestion along those lines. Paul says, thought you might be interested in the drying agent we use in the laboratory, a product called Dryrite. That's D-R-I-E-R-I-T-E. Dryrite. Paul says it's essentially anhydrous calcium sulfate, or gypsum, with a bit of cobalt-2 chloride added as a moisture indicator, although they have a non-indicating variety. Paul says it's not the cheapest stuff, at about $8 per pound, half that price, $4 per pound for non-indicating. But Paul says, unlike damp RID, you can dry it out in the oven and reuse it over and over. So in the long run, it will be less expensive. The indicating Dryrite is blue when dry and pink when wet, and needs to be dried in the oven. So it sounds like to me the EVA-Dry units may use this stuff. Paul says, I would probably get a 5-pound bag for $40, split it in two so that you always have some ready to go, or share with friends. I appreciate everybody who's written in with tips on keeping chest freezers and kegerators dry, and I'm sure Ash, who wrote in with the original question, is grateful as well. Nate from Denver writes in saying, I wrote in a few months ago about a wit beer that was too dark. Well, I changed it, quote-unquote, to a Belgian specialty ale by replacing the label. Nate said it won the Goat Shed Revival Homebrew Contest that was put on by the Boulder Beer Company. From this, I learned once again to relax, not worry, and have a homebrew, quoting Charlie Papazian. Excellent. Congratulations, Nate. Sometimes, in home brewing, happy accidents can turn out to be good things, as long as you know what to do. Dave from Centralia, Washington, writes about using Cooper's carbonation drops to prime his beer bottles. Dave says, all my bottles are U.S. pints. That's 16 ounces, rather than the standard 12-ounce bottles. 1 drop per 12-ounce bottle was the recommended dose. Well, instead of trying to do 1.5 drops per bottle, I just did 1 rather than risk accidental overpriming and the possible resulting bottle bomb. Do you think this will yield a flat beer? Well, Dave, I don't think you'll get a completely flat beer, but you probably won't get the level of carbonation that you're after. Cooper's carbonation drops are essentially lumps of sugar, a lot like sugar candy, that you drop in the bottle to prime the beer. In my experience, they work pretty well. But the problem is that you don't have much flexibility in controlling the dose of sugar. It's kind of one size fits all. Muntons also makes a product, and theirs is called Carb Tabs. Carb Tabs are much smaller, and they're little pill-shaped. And the recommended dose for an average carbonation in a beer is 4 Carb Tabs per bottle. So as you can see, you can vary your carbonation level pretty easily. So you might want to give those a try. Both those products are great, by the way, if you're getting into small batch brewing. Mike Lozano wrote in with a correction from the interview we did with him last time as we tasted his meads. Mike says, one correction, I misspoke. Sparkaloid should be allowed to work for 4 to 6 weeks, not 4 to 6 months. Or 4 to 8 weeks, not 4 to 8 months. So thanks, Mike. I'm sure that'll be a relief for those impatient potential mead makers out there. Although, you can't afford to be too impatient with mead. It kind of works on its own schedule. Okay, let's go. Let's get on down the road, as they say. Let's get into our interview with John Legnard of The Sandlot at Coors Field. John and his fellow brewers make some tasty brews at The Sandlot. And coincidentally, Rick Hagerbomber of Big Foamy Head mentioned in the most recent episode of Big Foamy Head that he had tried the smoked beer at Sandlot and enjoyed it quite a bit. So, you don't have to just take it from me that they make good beers there. Oh, by the way, speaking of Big Foamy Head, congratulations to those guys on their 2nd anniversary of podcasting. So, it's incredible. The time is just flying. It doesn't seem like, 2 years that we've been doing this kind of thing. Anyway, before I get more derailed, let's get into the interview with John Legnard of The Sandlot at Coors Field. So John Legnard, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks. Glad to have you guys.
And we're here in the basement of Sandlot Brewery here at Coors Field, and with us is Andy Sparks.
Hey, James.
And Steve Wilkes.
James, good to be back.
And Andy's wife, Sherry, is back in the corner. Say hi, Sherry. Hello. She's the quiet one of the bunch, the smartest. John, tell us, first of all, about you. What's your background in brewing, and how did you come here?
I started off, I moved to Colorado to become a veterinarian. I have a degree in microbiology, and my senior year in college, I kind of got hooked into taking a homebrew class. And that kind of derailed my veterinary science, going to be a doctor, and turned me into a brewer. So all things turned out okay, but my parents were a little concerned.
And what do they think now?
My dad's real happy about it. He drinks a lot of beer.
And you guys are basically all started out home brewing here, right?
Yeah, we have three brewers or brewmasters who are here, and we all actually started out home brewing. I mean, it's a great way to learn the trade. And what I tell people is, brew what you like and have fun doing it, but take good notes and learn from what you're doing. Every batch of beer was a learning experience for me. You try to make the same beer 3 or 4 different times, you'll learn a lot about the way the grain interacts with the yeast and the way the water affects the beer, and just all those little things. If you can put those, in your brain and use them practically, it's really no different on a big scale.
Tell us about the brewery here, about your facility, and then what your mission is in life.
Our facility is a 10-barrel brew house, a 3-vessel brew house. Our capacity is somewhere around 3,000 barrels a year. Our mission originally was to brew beer for the baseball stadium, Coors Field. We supply beer to the restaurant upstairs, and the obvious question is what do you guys do in the off season of baseball? We don't just goof off. We actually make beer for ski areas in Colorado. We've got 6 ski areas which we supply beer for, and actually recently the ski areas have bought more beer than the baseball stadium. So we're busier in the wintertime. The other thing that we do around here is we're charged with developing new recipes, testing new products, and coming up with exciting and innovative beers. The Blue Moon brand of Blue Moon Belgian White was born here in 1995. It's available nationwide now, and we also do all the testing for all the seasonals, spring, summer, and winter. So we do all those fun things here.
So you've got kind of the best of both worlds. from an employment standpoint, you work for a big corporation, but you are brewing on a small scale, and it's like you're working in a small brew pub.
It's exactly like any other microbrewery that I've ever visited or been to. The people that work here are passionate about brewing beer, and we're allowed to experiment and do some stuff. And I think what that does is it pushes the edge of the envelope. We've made smoked beers, we've made barley wines, we've made pilsners, we've made ESBs, we've made experimental beers like peanut ale, which is just a little bit different. But until you start pushing the edge of the envelope, you never know what you're capable of.
So how do you come up with an idea to do a peanut ale?
It's one of those crazy things that somebody in the marketing department probably sounds like a great idea. They don't really have any concept of the practical application of how to get the peanut flavor into the beer. And there really is no textbook where you can just go look under P for peanuts and figure out how many peanuts to add to a batch of beer to make it taste like peanuts. There were some pretty interesting discussions on how to get the peanut flavor in there, and we finally decided on choosy brewers choose Jif. So the next challenge was how much Jif, and with a little bit of small batch experimentation, we actually dialed it in, and the beer actually tasted great. It was at the Great American Beer Festival in 2006, and hopefully it'll be there again in 2007 in kind of the experimental beer category. It's something that once people tried it, they were dragging their friends over. You got to come try this beer. So it was a lot of fun to kind of push the edge of the envelope, and I think it really opened up a lot of people's eyes to how experimental we can be.
So what hurdles did you have to? I can't even imagine what kind of rest temperatures you put peanut butter through or anything.
It was one of those things where we tried it a couple of different ways, and the one that seemed to make the most sense and work the best was the simplest. We added it to the kettle. The beauty of that is it's readily dissolved and it enters the beer pretty quickly. The downside is if you've ever made peanut brittle, imagine trying to clean that out of an enclosed kettle. Oh. So luckily we have an intern.
So tell us about, one of my main reasons for coming to visit with you is to get good information, good tips for our homebrewers. Tell us about, for instance, Blue Moon, and how do you make a good Belgian wit? What are the keys to making a good Belgian wit homebrew?
I think the homebrewer has to be careful of three things. You want to make sure your sanitation is absolutely second to none. And sanitation is something you can't cut corners on in a homebrew situation or in a microbrew or brew pub situation. So as long as you start off with good, clean sanitation, I think you're doing a good thing. Your raw ingredients should be good, fresh, and you should try to use the best yeast strain possible. So we've got 3 different house yeasts that we use here. We use a typical ale yeast to ferment that beer. The Blue Moon Belgian White it's one of those beers that it's great in the summertime, but it's drinkable all year round. Oats, wheat, pale malt, and then we do the coriander and orange peel spice, and we just unfilter. So it's probably easy. It's one of the easier beers for a home brewer to make because a lot of home brewers don't do any filtration. With that beer, you don't need any filter, and it's done quickly. So those are some of the good things about home brewing is if you don't need to filter and it's done quick, that's one of my favorite beers.
And you use a standard ale yeast? You don't use a Belgian strain?
We don't use a Belgian strain. The yeast characteristics would probably be lost with the amount of orange peel and coriander we put in there, so we don't worry about any of the yeast characteristics. That beer is mostly about the orange zest and some of the coriander flavor, and the yeast is only there to cloud it up.
And when do you add the spices and the orange?
All the spices are added in the kettle, so just like a hopping towards the end.
Toward the end. So you don't want to lose those volatile aromas and flavors from those. I would imagine orange is fairly delicate.
Orange is really delicate. That's one that if you boil it for much more than about 7 to 10 minutes, you'll lose half of what you put in. So we only do it the last 3 to 5 minutes.
What your first beer that I tried at GABF a couple of years ago was a smoked beer. I was on a little quest for smoked beers, and it's great, and I believe it's award-winning as well.
Yeah, 2005 was Secondhand Smoke was the name of the beer that we entered, and I think that's probably the one you had. It was a German style Rauch beer, and that was kind of an anomaly for us. We won 7 medals on 10 beers that we entered, which I don't think anyone else has ever done. It was almost embarrassing, but it was we felt it was good recognition because we get brewers from other breweries coming by and sampling our beers, and they tell us, "You guys have great beer. Everything you do is solid." And all the stars aligned. All the judges seemed to put everything together, and we had our name was called more than anybody else's that year. It was pretty impressive.
So what's the key to making a good smoked beer?
A good smoked beer starts off with the malt. We're at a point where we can buy the best smoked malts available. I would tell anybody that's brewing at home, you don't need to buy the best smoked malt available. Make your own. Get your little Weber grill out and get some alder wood or some beech wood or whatever your favorite wood is, and actually put the stuff on a pan and put it on your grill and smoke it. That beer is predominantly smoked malt, but I think you could make it at home if you weren't trying to make 500 pounds of smoked malt. You could do it at home pretty easily. It wouldn't take that much.
What's the balance of smoked versus non-smoked malts?
For our beer, it's about 90% smoked malt.
Really?
Yep. It's almost 100% smoked malt. We add a little bit of some pale and some Munich malt to give it a little color.
Huh. Yeah, that surprises me because it's not all in your face. It's nicely. Wouldn't you
Very
guys agree?
subtle, yeah, which is nice. That's one of the big problems I find when I drink smoked beers, especially smoked home brews, is they tend to be overwhelmingly, with the smoke. And that's really not what I think I'm looking for in a smoked beer. Is that what you want? Is that just subtle, kind of like you can smell a barbecue on the wind somewhere, and you just keep going back for another whiff because it smells so good or it tastes so good.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys like it. I mean, that's one beer that we kind of tweak around a little bit, but for the most part, that recipe is fairly well set. And I tell people, if you're adding liquid smoke or you're adding some artificial smoke, it's going to be overpowering. It needs to be subtle. And it needs to be just a hint so that you can get that it's smoke, but not so much that it's unpalatable.
You were also telling us about a Pilsner, an old-style Pilsner, that unfortunately is not on tap upstairs, but it is a Pilsner made in the old way.
Yeah. It's called Barmen Pilsner, and that sounds like a pretty bizarre name, but actually Barmen is a city in Prussia where the original Coors family is from. And back in 1997, Pete Coors asked us to brew something that would mimic the old style or kind of go to what the old flavor used to be of some of those European beers. And we came up with the Barmen Pilsner recipe. It's available in Denver metro area in about 20 accounts, and we can barely keep it in stock. It's a lager. It takes us 5 to 6 weeks to make. So when we're not making that, it clogs the tanks. Or when we're making that, it clogs the tanks up for making something else. It's won 3 medals at the Great American Beer Festival. Good thing I'm looking at my list. Going back to 2002, it was a silver medal. 2003, it was a bronze medal. 2005, it got the gold. So it's a beer that I think can withstand the test of time, and it's one that I think true style aficionados for the Pilsner style can appreciate that this is the way it was supposed to be made, and it's kind of set itself apart as one of the great beers.
So this is an old-style Pilsner without rice or without corn.
Yeah, it's 100% all malt. We use a combination of German and American pale malts in it. We've got German hops imported. We use a yeast strain that we harvested from a friend in Austria, southern Germany, basically. And we've been using that pretty constantly since 1997 to make this beer. It's served in a traditional tall pin Pilsner glass with a gold rim. The accounts that have it here have to serve it in that glass, and they have to use the 7-minute pour technique, which basically foams the beer up so that when the beer's finished, it's got almost a snow cone head that pops out of the top of the glass. The presentation's unbelievable, and the beer's great, too.
Talk to us about the specifics of that. What's the starting gravity, and get technical on us, John.
Get technical on you. Well, we use degrees Plato. That's going to be about a 14-degree Plato beer. We're going to use all German hops, and we're going to shoot for somewhere in the 28 to 30, 32 IBU range. Finish is going to be somewhere in the 2.6 to 3 range. It's going to be a pretty malty beer, actually, but it balances nicely with all the hops.
And talk about your strategy for lagering.
With our yeast strain, our fermentation time is going to be somewhere around 10 days at around 11 degrees C. That 52 to 55 range. It's probably harder to make at home than any of the other beers. It's pretty light in body and color. It's kind of a dark golden straw. And what we always tell people is, we lager it as long as possible. We won't let it go out if it's got any sulfur remaining in it, but we can let it sit a much longer time than most of the other beers. The 5 to 6 week total time is kind of the minimum.
I would assume that you would be pitching at lagering temperature, right?
We do. We pitch it. We chill our stuff down coming out of the heat exchanger to right around 11 degrees C. We pitch at that temperature. We may let it ramp up a little bit for the yeast to get started, but then we cool it right back down. It's tough. It's tough at home to maintain that temperature. I mean, we've got the controls and the system here that allows us to maintain a lot tighter control over a lot of different stuff. And I always tell people, I said, if I go to a place and they've got a light lager like a Pilsner or Helles that's made well, you can tell that brewery knows what they're doing, because those are the hardest beers to make. People scoff at lighter beers, but there's no room to hide any flaws. If you make a good light lager, you've done a really good job all the way through your process.
Do you employ a diacetyl rest?
In the fermentation, we will do something. We do a little bit with the diacetyl in the mash as well, but nothing out of the ordinary, really.
Now, you work for Coors, which they do a lot of lagering, and they do a lot of brewing. Was there a training program that they put you through, or are the resources that you call upon, or do they kind of leave you alone to your own means down here?
They're really hands-off, which is good and bad. They're hands-off to the point where there may be some stuff they could have helped us with in the beginning that we were unaware of, but the systems are completely different. We use tall cylindrical fermenters. They use flat bottom fermenters. The yeast strains are completely different. We have brewed with yeast down here from Coors, and it doesn't work as well. The yeast that we've picked up here actually is pretty sulfur-free after about 3 or 4 weeks, so it works pretty well. In Golden, they use a different yeast than we do.
Now, I've got to ask the obvious question. There are a lot of homebrewers out there, and my stance is that I admire the skill of the big brewers. It's just the recipes that I don't enjoy. I've got to ask the question: if you're making old style pilsners down here, when is Coors going to start making old style pilsners?
I probably can't answer that question. It probably comes down to more marketing, and basically they're brewing the beer that sells, and they're brewing the beer that makes the most sense and the most money for them. What we do down here is experiment, and hopefully we're opening their eyes to different styles and different flavors that may work in their system. Blue Moon Belgian White's a perfect example. I mean, that's a flavorful, full-body beer with, unfiltered. It couldn't be any more less like a domestic than it is. I mean, it is anti or the opposite of whatever those other beers are, and it really works.
That leads me to another question. Obviously, there's a lot of brewers that work for Coors, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of them would really like to be doing what you're doing, which is allowed some flexibility and the ability to do some different things. Can you speak to that?
There's a ton of people that work for the big brewery that have a passion for brewing. I think their passion is just as big as ours. Their job is to brew per a recipe. They try to make all the raw ingredients, the hops, the malt, the water, taste the same, and that's very difficult. I mean, that's one thing that we can't do down here. If we get a different batch of malt in from a different season or different year, or it's a different color, we're kind of stuck with what we're given. We're more like the boutique wineries. When they get a batch of grapes in, they have good grape years and bad grape years. We kind of go with the flow and make whatever we can with what we're given. Any of the big breweries they try to make their beer as perfect every single time. And I'd challenge any home brewer to make something that light. It's not easy to do.
Yeah, you talk about nowhere to hide. It's a subtly flavored beer, and any mistake at all in the process, and it's going to show up.
Yeah, that's, the analogy we like to use, it's like going to the beach in a Speedo. if you have any flaws, any spare tire, any, body hair on your back, if you're a little flabby around the middle, it's going to show. And that's the light loggers. If you go to the beach and you wear a sweatsuit and big baggy shorts, that's the stouts or the ESBs or the IPAs. There's plenty of room for flaws and mistakes to be masked in those.
So what are some other... Have we talked about your favorite beer that you brew, or a favorite experimental beer that you brew?
It's tough. People always ask me, what's your favorite beer? And I ask you, do you have kids? Because if you have more than one kid, you really can't pick a favorite. It varies from day to day, from week to week, to month. I mean, we've got a really, really good batch of smoked beer right now. I'm really, really liking that. Well, we just finished up brewing a Hefeweizen. Well, that's just starting to be carbonated. I'm like, wow, this is really good now, too. So I tend to migrate around from beer to beer to beer. I don't have, I would say I'm more of a malt person than a hop person. The general public here does not perceive IPAs very well. What we generally, as wild as we get with hops, is like a strong ESB, and that even varies. But we've done hoppier beers. It seems that they don't seem to sell as well. The people that want them are more vocal than the 50 that don't. But bottom line is what sells.
You guys are doing lighter gravity beers, I'm assuming, here at the park, right?
No, not really. We've served Pale Box on tap. We've served Doppelbock on tap here. We've served a barley one. I think people need to realize that we're willing to do whatever, in experimentation. Our standard beers are all in the 4.5 to 5.5 range. So, I mean, they're not light or lightweight. They're not 3.2. I mean, they're all pretty decent beers. Some of our standard ones, our Right Field Red, which has been around since 1995, won 2 awards at the Great American Beer Festival. That's one that, we make every day. We make day after day, and it's a good, solid Scottish-style ale.
Even less than 5% is going to be light gravity for a big percentage of our brewers out there. There's so many people doing huge beers nowadays. I know that Steve and I, at least, I don't know about you, Andy, you may still be hankering for the big beers, but Steve and I are on a quest for a good session beer, something that's light in gravity and but yet still satisfying. Do you have any hints, any clues to help us down that road?
The beers that we make are generally true to style. So we'll look at the Great American Beer Festival style page, and we will try to brew a beer to those exact specifications as close as we can for entry in the category. So that's how we brew our beer. I mean, we've got a Helles that was on tap before you guys got here, which was light. I mean, it was probably only 3.4 in alcohol, but full-bodied, great. You could drink more than one. You didn't feel weighed down, bloated, and you weren't going to be hammered when you left the ballpark.
So when you're brewing a light gravity beer like that, what are the keys to having the satisfying mouthfeel?
We play around a lot with different varieties of malt, different flavors of malt, and then because we've got a heated mash tun upstairs, we can mess with our mash temperatures quite a bit. We can do a multi-step mash, and we can, if we go on the high side of saccharification, we can get a full-bodied beer that's still pretty light, but just less fermentable. So that's probably our single biggest, play around factor is the saccharification temperature. We're not stuck with one particular temperature.
And you said that you mentioned in the video tour upstairs that you were able to do decoctions. How often do you do decoctions?
We've been experimenting with those. That's a fairly recent addition. We added some new piping and valves. And we're going to try to do that for some of our traditional lagers because that's the old way of doing things. So we're going to try to go back and revamp, probably use our same recipe, but decoct a portion of it. So we're not really sure about the results yet.
I was going to say, what does decoction do for you?
It's not easy to put down, but when you taste an imported German beer, it's there. It's probably an additional 10% in the mouthfeel, a little bit more body. It's got some really great sweetness and great body to the beer. And I think that's only achievable by doing that decoction.
Very good. Any more questions, guys?
I think I'm good.
Last chance. Thank you very much for your hospitality and your time and the beer. And keep up the good work.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll meet again. Maybe you guys will be out for the Great American Beer Festival.
Well, thanks again to John for taking time to talk to us and for the hospitality as well. You can see a video tour of the Sandlot on Basic Brewing Video. It's a beautiful setup. Lots of copper. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. And while you're on our site, check out our online shop where you can find great pricing on our DVDs and a combo deal to save you even more. In our first DVD, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, we walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process, from milling your grain to collecting your wort. And we do infusion mashing and step mashing and batch sparging and fly sparging, and you can pick your way through using an interactive, non-linear DVD menu type thing. It's just the cat's pajamas. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it from us online. We'll send it to you. Remember shirts and hats, including our Go Forth and Flocculate shirt. And thanks to everybody who's also continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are C++ programming, from problem analysis to program design, and making artisan cheeses, 50 fine cheeses that you can make in your own kitchen. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what there, so no worries. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. And we appreciate your support. We get a little slice of that. Well, that's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by our buddy Kelly Dodson down in Austin, who also did our logo. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.